Hey everyone, welcome to the #1 podcast for everything iPhone and iPad. This is the iMore Show.
It's July 18th, 2012. I'm Seth Clifford, and you may know me from such podcasts as Iterate and mobile development companies like Nickelfish. I'm joined tonight by some guy from some other website, Rene Ritchie.
Seth, how are you? Thank you for the glowing introduction.
And, of course, the best-looking chat room in podcast history. Hello, chat room.
Our chat room is damn good looking, if I do say so myself.
They're a handsome group.
Georgia is not here tonight. She actually had a personal function to attend, and apparently everyone but me has a life, so I'm not allowed forbidding or otherwise excluding her from doing these things.
Well, I don't have much of a life. I mean, here I am.
No, but you have on occasion vacationed and gotten on surfboards or done things.
No, that's true. That's true, yeah.
I believe you even joined us for a podcast from, where was it? Aruba?
Aruba, out of the country podcast, yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure the wife was nonplussed, but we enjoy your devotion, Seth.
Yeah, that one was a little tiny bit of a strain on my marriage, but I managed to salvage it.
Got set up for a little bit of punishment, did you?
Yeah.
All right, so we have actually a surprising amount to talk about, Seth. I think we'll get the patents out of the way first because it's been just silly this week. On the plus side, Apple was granted one of the biggest, silliest patent grabs since the multi-touch stuff, I think, when they got a patent that covers everything from list views on a mobile device to disappearing scroll bars. I don't know how much you got a chance to look into it, but it was fair. It was just as wide-reaching and non-specific as a good litigious patent should be.
Yeah, honestly, I did not get much of a chance to dive in. It's been a busy couple of days, but I've been kind of keeping up with things at a very cursory level. So I've noticed that there's been a lot of chatter and there's been a lot of vitriol hurled back and forth on the Twitters. So I assume that Apple won something and made everybody angry because that's usually what happens when I see that kind of stuff. People getting angry.
I mean, it goes back to to the Macworld 2007 when Steve Jobs was up on stage introducing the iPhone. And if you know the backstory, I'm not going to say who's right and who's wrong in this because that's a whole other podcast, but Apple felt that Microsoft unfairly benefited from taking the Macintosh and making Windows out of it. And they had a lengthy bit of litigation over that. And they ended up signing a cross-licensing agreement, and that went away. But he made a point of saying that, boy, have we patented it when it came to the iPhone. And a couple of years ago, they did get that multi-touch patent, and they've used things like slide to unlock, and they've used various forms of trade dress over the years to sue, actually mostly recently, to sue the likes of HTC and Motorola, and of course their biggest rival, the Samsungs.
Yeah, I mean, there's like the Apple Samsung stuff is like a battle for the ages. It's like extended Lord of the Rings stuff. It's crazy the way it just continues on and on and on. It's like Return of the King, you know? You think it's going to be over, and then the screen fades to black, and then the movie goes on for another 17 minutes.
It's kind of like you ask yourself, like, one does not just walk into Mordor. Well, why don't you jump on the backs of the eagles and fly there? But then, oh no, the ring wraiths have flying beasties too. Fell beasties, I think. So it is exactly that. And yeah, the patents are silly and ridiculous, and the patent office keeps granting them.
Do you think that's because they're not, now, I don't want to say ignorant. I don't think ignorant is the right word, because obviously they've been legally apprised of everything that's going on. But do you think there's just a fundamental misunderstanding or non-understanding of the things that are going on? So they're just kind of like, patents are coming in and they're like, yeah, you can have that one and you can have that one, like without really taking into account what the ramifications of that are? Yeah,
I think it's, I used to think that they would rather grant patents and let companies sue each other than not grant patents and go through a bunch of rigmarole. Like, for example, a couple of years ago, they granted a URL displayed in a bar adjacent to a window displaying the content of that URL. And I'm quite certain I had Spry Mosaic a decade or so ago.
Yeah, I know. Some of the things that come up and get approved are, they're so intentionally like widespread and not vague, but all encompassing that you can see how people could apply it to a very wide swath of other technologies and just stomp on stuff. And I don't really know why there hasn't been kind of like a stop point in the patent office where they're like, okay, obviously there are a lot of things going on that we might not get the full picture of. Let's stop and take a step back and try to figure out what's happening, and then maybe start kind of rewarding these patents in the future. They just kind of keep plowing forward and approving stuff without taking into account what's happening now, and so that is just snowballing the whole situation.
Look, we're patenting red. Red? Yeah, red. Okay, here's your red. Go. Sue the traffic lights. Go.
Yeah.
I want to bring one thing up, though, because people get offended by this, but it's not something you should be offended by. Samsung absolutely copies Apple. And the thing about it is that's not really a big deal. I mean, Samsung is a huge conglomerate. They make everything from refrigerators to, almost anything you can think of that you see in your everyday life. Samsung probably has a company that makes that. And one refrigerator is very similar to the other refrigerator. In most industries, design has been around so long that they've become appliances, they become commodities. It's simply not a factor. And I'm willing to bet all the money in my pockets against all the money in your pocket, Seth, that it didn't even occur to Samsung to make something that looked different. They just assumed, hey, this is what a smartphone, this is what a tablet looks like.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I'd go so far as to say it didn't occur to them. I think it probably occurred to them because they made phones prior to the iPhone. And Samsung's not the only one in this case that, after the iPhone came on the market and was such a success, looked at that form factor and said, people are buying those a lot. We should probably do something that looks and feels like that. That's not something that's endemic to Samsung, and it's not something that only Samsung is doing. That's the whole market did that. And now we've seen a lot of kind of sub-variants in that slab form factor. Obviously, some are a lot bigger and thinner, and some of them are, different aspect ratios and stuff like that. But there was a time where there was basically like some stuff, and then there was the iPhone, and then there was a lot of stuff that looked like the iPhone. But it's not just Samsung. I mean, that was a market trend.
Well, Samsung is particularly egregious about it. I mean, they make their AC adapters look like, if you ever looked at that graphic, you can put a series of Samsung products right next to Apple products, and they look product per product almost identical. And I'm just saying that's not, given the wider context, that's not a big deal. If you have a round rect AC adapter, that's not at the end of the world. That's not how companies in other industries typically compete with each other. I mean, sedans, that is very seldom trade dress disputes over the shape of a sedan.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. The one thing I did find along those lines that was really curious was when we got that Galaxy Tab last summer, the AC adapter, I mean, yeah, like there was the round rect at one end, like you said, but the other end looked like a 30-pin adapter that you would use with an iPhone. And it's kind of, I took it out of the box and I was like, wait, did I pull the wrong thing out? Because I get packages all the time at the office. I'm always ordering stuff. And I'm like, wait, did I make like a monoprice order for extra adapters or something? Like, it's easy for people to be confused, but they're not going to be confused as to, oh, I should have bought this, or I wanted something else. It's not confusion that way. I mean, I think the only confusion at that point is you're plugging that into your iPad and it's not charging.
Well, they probably consider it a feature. Hey, this is what a smartphone plug looks like. It is, at a certain point, a consumer-friendly feature for things that do similar things to look the same. I mean, there was a lawsuit a long time ago, Lotus versus Excel, and the judgment was that when something is meant to do something so similar, it will inevitably end up looking similar to accomplish the same task. Right. And we've seen repeats of that over the years. And I just think that Samsung, I mean, sure, Samsung is not a design company the way Apple was a design-centric company. And yes, they've made a lot of really cool-looking stuff now, like the Galaxy Note, the Galaxy S3. They've started thinking a lot about design. But when they first came into the market, they just looked at the market, and the way they looked at refrigerators and other appliances, I think they just made stuff that looked alike.
Oh, yeah. I don't think this was like a concerted effort to take down Apple. It was just, what's popular? We need to do what's popular. This is popular. We're going to do that. Like you said, it's just looking at the market and making basically what amounts to an educated guess as to what people will buy. And it's a very similar thing. Now, you could go as far to say, okay, that's fine for the hardware, but when you get down to the software, the way that the the software, their icons looked kind of iOS-ish, and they had the 4 things in the dock, and there were all those like little, piece by piece dissections of Samsung's follies along the way. And depending on what point you're trying to argue, you can really see it both ways. You could see it as, yes, this is, a mean-spirited attempt to just bite off of iOS and confuse people and say, oh, it's just like an iPhone. But on the other hand, you can see it the way you just said, which is, this is what smartphones do. This is what people expect smartphones to look like. Let's make it look the same way. So it really depends on which angle you're trying to play.
Well, we've talked about this on Iterate, too. At a certain point, familiarity is a feature. And when someone picks up a phone, if it looks and works the way you expect a phone to look and work, that is a feature to you. And we've seen a lot of people, and they've talked about this on the Android Central podcast, who prefer TouchWiz over stock Android. The Google experience, which is, almost anathema to those of us who are geeks, they actually prefer it because it is more familiar to them. It is an easier thing. And Samsung is the most successful Android original device manufacturer. And it's and for a long time, for example, the iPhone was not on Verizon. And you'd walk into Verizon and you'd want an iPhone, you couldn't have it. And Samsung was the closest thing to an Apple device not made by Apple. So whether you just couldn't get Apple, or you were philosophically or for whatever reason you don't like Apple, Samsung made a lot of money out of being not Apple, and the closest to Apple being not Apple.
Yeah, and like you said, for a long time on Verizon, that your best bet if you couldn't get an iPhone was, what's the next best thing? And so that was a niche that they filled very nicely for those customers. And that's you can almost pinpoint the rise of Android as a platform to that initial Motorola Droid marketing campaign.
And the Droid did not look like an iPhone.
No, it didn't. I mean, it looked like let's be honest. We've been using smartphones for a while. Had something like the Droid come out in like 2006, I would have been all over it.
I would have smashed my Toyota to pieces with that fine Corellian Starfighter design and look at the Motorola Droid.
Yeah. I mean, a keyboard like that and a screen like that, I would have killed kittens for something like that a few years ago.
Yeah.
But after the iPhone, it was just, you're on Verizon, here's what you can have instead. And they really pushed those phones hard. And I think that really kicked that platform up into, the start of where it is today. And now it's inertia. The
chat room is taking exception to your treatment of kittens, sir.
Oh, listen, I like cats. I'm not a dog person. I like cats. But that's what I'm saying. Like, that's how much I would have liked a phone like that. I would have gone against my better judgment.
No, Seth is referring to not real kittens, but the virtual internet kittens that are killed every day in the pursuit of having a better smartphone.
Exactly. Yeah. Virtual internet kittens.
The ones that dance on pianos and YouTube videos and clog up our interwebs as people send them merrily from one to the other.
Yes.
So just to get back to the specifics of this patent, disappearing scroll bars, list views, these, I'm sure, what my guess is what's going to happen is exactly what happened last time, that there will be many court battles. Apple will win some, Apple will lose some, injunctions will be granted, injunctions will be overturned. And as Jerry Hildenbrand is fond of saying, one rich company will pay a bit of money to another rich company. And ultimately, yeah, consumers will suffer. Geeks won't be able to get the phone they want. Most people don't care. They'll get whatever phone is on the shelf. And we'll all get over it in a couple years.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, that's what patents really are. It's patent war is like tectonic plate movement. It's two giant things moving in tandem, and sometimes they slide against one another, and there's really not anything happening. And then sometimes they smash together and cause mountains, and other times they rend giant holes in the surface of the earth, and there's earthquakes, but it affects people that are right in that area. It doesn't affect the population at large, so we all kind of move on and do something else. And people in that area are like the developers, the people who are buying specific phones.
I needed my Galaxy Nexus in this small span of a week.
Exactly. That's there are certain people that are always going to be completely affected by it, and then everything else just kind of like it lessens as the shockwave moves out.
Yeah, absolutely. And as been pointed out before, I mean, everything is a remix. It's just Apple has been granted patents on some things, Motorola on other things, and by luck of the draw, they have those patents and they are going to prosecute them. It's part of competition. It's not because they can't innovate. It's because they can innovate and litigate. It's not because they're afraid of Android. If you look at their profit share, Apple is dominating to an extent that I think is unhealthy for this market. It is because they can, and because Apple is a company run by human beings who have a history of not have a history, a bad history with this kind of stuff, Seth. I think history does influence the present.
Yeah, it does. I'm hoping that history doesn't continue to repeat itself. I mean, we're always going to see stuff like this, but I just really hope that something changes, even on a very small level, just so it's not the same exact thing over and over again. Because it's exhausting just to hear about it, and because this is like the industry that we exist in. I mean, like, my wife doesn't care about this stuff.
No.
She might hear something on the news if it happens to make the news because Apple makes the news, but she'll ask me and be like, what's going on with Apple? They're getting sued. And I'm like, don't even get me started.
Yeah, and quite frankly, I am a fan of different things. I actually like Motorola's design ethic because it does not look like the iPhone. I'm not too worried about slide to unlock because I would quite frankly like a better method of unlocking my phone. And if Apple stops some company from doing it, maybe that company will come up with a better one, and then Apple will be screwed by their own litigation. I think that is the best revenge.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that I like the ideas that Apple has, and they work now the way I think of, my phone use, but I am constantly looking for something better, something cooler, something different, and I keep coming back to iOS because it does all the things I want, the best way I think it can, but innovation happens regardless of all this stuff, and someone eventually is going to hit on something that's going to be big.
Well, like, look at the latest Samsung. You can wake it up with your voice. You can say, my voice is my password.
I just watched that movie last week.
I did too. Damn it. Get out of my head, Seth Clifford. That's the awesome Sneakers. If you haven't seen it, watch Sneakers.
Good flick.
Oh, yeah. Soccerologist in the chat room got it immediately. And Atan Raka Reza, I apologize, I don't know how to pronounce your name. He's saying that there's pattern unlock. There's all sorts of different kinds of unlocks, and I'm happy about that. As a consumer, I want differentiation. Everything evolves and survives better when there is differentiation in the market, even humans.
Yeah, totally.
The other silly thing in patents today is that Apple has been ordered to apologize to Samsung in writing for saying that the Galaxy Tab copied the iPad. It's a bit of a mixed blessing because the judge ruled that the Galaxy Tab was not cool enough to be a mimicry of, to be like a copy of the iPad, which is interesting.
What happened? Like, I saw people talking about this on Twitter, but I didn't get to spend a lot of time and click links and things. That phrase was actually uttered, that the tab is not.
I don't know if that was supposed to be jest or if that was supposed to be said, I don't know how to take it, but that was the quote. And Apple is not going to be happy to talk about Samsung at all. They're certainly not going to be happy to have to apologize. I believe it's on apple.com/UK and in a UK newspaper. So it's going to be interesting. Are they going to say Samsung failed to copy the iPad? The judge said it wasn't cool enough and they haven't sold enough to be considered a copy of the iPad. Apple is a proud company. If
they're made to do something like that, it is going to be the most cloaked, scathing, tongue-in-cheek apology ever perpetrated for anyone.
And what's funny is that it's England, and England, they are the masters of the offhanded compliment. If you have ever seen anything from Fawlty Towers or any great British comedy, you know that they will send John Cleese up there, and he will apologize in a way that is both devastatingly insulting and charming at the same time.
Yeah, seriously.
Yeah. We are sorry that your unsuccessful attempts to copy the iPad resulted in a loss in a legal battle. Had you sold more, we could have collected damages.
Yeah. It's very disappointing to us that you did not prove to be a worthy adversary.
Yeah, I think I'm done with patents for a while, Seth.
Yeah, fine by me.
So the other thing that was funny today, and I'm going to stick with funny for a while. I think today is a funny, silly day. AT&T announced their shared plans.
Yeah, I saw this too. Are
you going to switch to an AT&T shared plan, Seth?
No, No, I'm not, because I am readying the life jackets for my October man overboard.
Oh, you're a great switch to Verizon?
Yeah, and everybody, I get different responses every time I mention it. Some people are like, you'll be better off just sticking around, and then other people are like, come, it's so great. And I know it's just trading one annoyance for another, but I'm ready to have a new annoyance. So, no, I will not be switching us to one of these shared data.
Will you go to a shared data plan on Verizon, though?
I think we have to, don't we? If we start new?
Maybe. Well, you can always sign up as separate entities.
Oh, I'm not going to do that. That's ridiculous.
Honey, that is your plan. This is my plan. Your plan, my plan. Giant tape across the middle of the room.
Yeah. The bottom line is that I know I'll probably end up paying more on Verizon, but at the same time, the 3 times a month when I need to make a phone call in the year 2012, I will be able to complete said phone calls. And that is probably worth $20 or $30 more a month for me, which is what it will end up being probably.
Now, these plans are interesting, and Leanna, our math professor, first of all, they say they're simpler, and they're not. You need to take out your iPhone calculator.app and flip that sumbitch sideways in order to figure out these plans, because they are not simple. But they can actually legitimately save you money. Not always, so you should do the math, but sometimes. And Leanna decided to work everything out for you, and I'll drop the link in the chat room, and it will be in the show notes, so you can figure it out. But the problem I have with shared plans is this, Seth. Let's say you and I are, enjoying a beer, watching something maybe watching Sneakers or Tron on the tube, and we order a tasty large size pizza. And they deliver that pizza, and they say it's $20 for the pizza. And then they notice there's 2 of us, and they say, oh, no, wait, you're sharing this pizza. It's going to be $30. And I know some really disgusting restaurants try to charge you a plate sharing fee. And I know someone in the comments brought up that hotels often charge you for double occupancy. This is not that. This is bits of data from a pipe. Why are they making me pay more just because we're splitting those bits of data between the 2 of us?
Yeah, like that's just it. You can look at a restaurant that charges a fee like that and say, well, there's a seat at the table, and the table's not turning over the revenue that it would have if there were 4 people buying 4 meals and whatever. And I work in restaurants, and I understand why they do that. I think it's dumb, but I understand. And hotels, like if you charge double occupancy, it's like, well, there's more people in the room. There's probably going to be more of a mess. There's going to be more to clean up. You can reason through that stuff. These plans where they basically are giving you the same thing, like you said, it's the pizza, and they're going, here you go. Oh, wait a minute. Wait a second. No, we can't let you have it for this price. It's it's mind-boggling that this is the tack that they're going to take. It's
the same thing. For example, in AT&T, there's another bit of AT&T news. AT&T already charges you more if you tether. And there's a rumor that they might charge you more with iOS 6 when you can do FaceTime over 3G. And some people consider this overselling. For example, AT&T gives you 2 gigabytes, but they don't really think you can use it because it's hard to consume data on a smartphone. Little do they know. So if you're tethering, they figure you're going to use more of the data that they pretended to sell you for the first price. And if you're doing streaming video over FaceTime, even though you can do it for free over Skype and always could, you might use more of the data that they pretended to sell you to begin with. But I call hogwash. I call shenanigans. I say that they sold you 2 gigabytes of data, and you should be able to damn well do what you want with it, whether it's you or your wife. As long as you don't go over, that is the 2 gigabytes they sold you.
I agree. I don't understand why they can't just make it a clear-cut distinction. Like, this is, you pay for this many gigabytes. This is what you get. If you go over, this is how much we charge you for each one. They have to do this shell game with extra gigs and how many gigs will you need? And oh, you didn't use them, but you're going to use them for this and not that. It's completely obnoxious and hostile to a user to try to understand that and either feel like you're getting slighted or that you don't understand it at all. If they just made it, I don't think they're making any more. Well, they probably are making more money doing it this way, but they're losing any and all goodwill they might have, because people are going in and probably leaving frustrated and just being like, well, whatever, I'll just pay it because I need to. As opposed to, I really like that this was explained to me. I understand it, and I have the thing that I need, and not anymore.
So I should point out that the heart and soul of the carrier business is ARPU, which is average revenue per user. They need to get as much money out of each and every one of us every month as they possibly can. And by hook or by crook, they are going to do that. Humans are also incredibly dumb creatures. We always say that we would like a simple fixed price, but when we are offered a simple fixed price, we will actually go with a competitor who is offering a more complex, but seemingly on the surface cheaper price. So we basically do this to ourselves. That being said, Seth, in my city, in Montreal, they recently replaced all the coin meters with computerized meters. And it turns out the reason they did this is because coin meters would show you how much time was left on the meter. So if someone paid for an hour, left after half an hour, you could pull up and use the rest of their hour. And they determined that if you could no longer see how much time was left, you would be forced to pay no matter how much time the previous person had paid for. And they would ultimately make more money. Apple, when the Apple Store was built downtown, Apple offered to pay all the parking for the entire year so that their customers would have a better experience. And the city said no, because there was no way Apple could pay them the amount of money that they make overcharging people, double, triple, quadruple charging for the parking. And that's what this feels like to me. It feels the same fundamental, innate, deep down unfairness that I get when I hear stories like that.
Yeah, and it's infuriating because you feel that in an economy, there's like a certain understanding of how trade is supposed to work. I give someone money and they give me something, whether it's goods or services that I desire, and it's this much and that's what I get. And when you enter into agreements like this, you feel that it's completely imbalanced, because no matter what you're doing, you're feeling like you're not getting what you're paying for.
Yes.
If you don't use all the data, then you're like, well, why am I paying all this money for all this data I'm not using? If you go past it, they don't just say, oh, it'll be this much more. They make your experience worse. They get you coming and going, and it's just absolutely like the worst. I mean, Okay, yeah, it's not the worst, because obviously the world is full of horrific things that thankfully we don't have to suffer on.
Worstness is relative, Seth.
Yeah, I mean, seriously. As far as business is concerned, it is shocking that there has not been widespread consumer revolt. But like you said, people, they don't think it through. They're just like, yeah, that's fine. I mean, it's the same thing I've been saying for a while, that I would prefer a system that has, like outside of the US, where you buy an unlocked phone and then you choose your carrier. People will not pay $700 for a phone, even though you could show them on paper, like, listen, you will save $1,100 if you just buy the $700 phone now. They're like, I don't want, I pay $99. I'm done.
Well, like, people will go and they will take the free iPhone 3GS instead of paying the $200 for the iPhone 4S, even though on a 2-year contract, the difference is negligible. The total cost of ownership is almost the same, but all people see is that upfront value.
Yeah. I mean, I guess that's just like a personal kind of understanding that you have to come to get that math, to understand it. But on a widespread level, people either don't want to, or refuse to, or just are incapable of understanding it, and that's why this cycle continues this way.
But I'm gonna dismount from the rant bar for a second and just point out that again, Leanna did the math, and under some circumstances, because you do get voice, you do get messaging, you do get a data bucket, you can save money with these plans depending on how many phones you have. And she goes through 2 phones, 4 phones. There's a charge for tablets. There's a charge for laptops. But you can figure it out. And if it is more beneficial, then the carriers are they're not doing you a favor, but they are screwing you slightly less. You will be able to sit down with a small modicum of greater ease than you otherwise might.
Yeah, I got to read that. I got to read that post and just take a look at it.
Absolutely. Seth, the stuff that we're seeing so far with iOS 6, I'm going to move us back over to friendlier territory. We have got beta 3 now. It took 3 weeks to come out. Apple often does 2-week cycles. This one took 3 weeks to come out. that is fairly on schedule. I mean, we did the math last year. I'll put up the post again, how many betas there usually are. But if we count on 8 betas, it sounds like we're on good track for fall, October still.
Oh yeah, I would think so. I don't think they're going to deviate from that at this point. I think that seems like a reasonable conclusion to draw.
Now, I put up a post about the features because some people consider iOS 6 a disappointment, that it, in fact, after Google's Android 4.1 Jelly Bean demo, some people were saying that the 0.1 release of Android was substantially more than the full point release of iOS. So I decided to do a tale of the tent poles and kind of put iOS 6 next to iOS 5.4.3.2, as well as next to Android 4.1, BlackBerry 10, and Windows Phone 8. Not the actual feature sets, but what was showcased, what each company chose to show off as the flagship features. And it was kind of interesting.
I have not seen that article yet. I apologize. Can you put it in the chat room so I can look at it?
I will put it in the chat room. But the bottom line is this. What Apple showed off was very, very good stuff, but it was very, very good stuff for Apple. The majority of things that Apple showed are ways to strengthen Apple's control over the platform. So if you look at it, and I will put it in here. Oh, sorry, it's not it. There's a sublink. 1 second.
I agree with you that, I agree with people in saying that it feels like less of a full release and more of a point release, but that's, we're talking the eventual release of new hardware and a marketing push. So that's not really, they're not going to release iOS 5.2 with a new phone and be like, it's just as good. Like, that doesn't get people excited. Whereas there's constantly new Android phones coming out, and the Galaxy Nexus has been out for several months. So the bump of Android is kind of like, hey, early adopters, here's the next iteration of the software that's going to be even better and add more features and do great stuff. And the 1% of 1% that is running it is like, this is great. This is the future. It's awesome. I've heard only good things about Jelly Bean. I haven't had a chance to play with it yet, but everyone that has played with it is like, yeah.
Have you got your Nexus 7 yet? Because mine is just gotten on that. The shipping label has been ready for a week, but it has finally found the package. I'm guessing at the airport bar and gotten the thing en route here, and it'll be here Friday.
I did not order one. Because just because.
You'll get one eventually.
Yeah, probably. Everyone has them and is saying it's great. Even people that are avowed Android dislikers are coming on Twitter and being like, okay, full disclosure, this thing is actually very good, more than I thought, All
right, so I'm going to I put the link in the chat room. And the thing I want to get to first is that it's important to point out that iOS 6 is not done yet. It's in beta, and every year Apple introduces a basic set of features at a preview event, and then the final new hardware-specific features at the iPhone event. So, and I noticed a pattern, Seth, when I put them all out side by side, I noticed a pattern that almost always there is the video feature. For example, the iPhone 3GS got video recording, the 4 got 720p, the 4S got 1080p, and then there's the Santa Claus Christmas commercial feature, which is, for example, your voice control, your FaceTime, and your Siri. So I'm guessing that one of the new features for iOS 6 will be some sort of video panorama demo that Phil Schiller can do, where he holds up an iPhone and waves it around and auto-magically gets either a full-on pano or some sort of 3D jobby that entertains the crowds, because I think that's the kind of demo that Schiller does well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's apps that do that kind of stuff now. I think the one is 360 panorama or something, where you basically turn it on and move the phone around on kind of like, I guess it's an X and a Y axis, and you just kind of move it up and down, and it does that. There was panorama stuff baked into iOS 5 in the beta that never made it, right? Yeah,
my understanding that was very simple pano, almost like auto stitch, and this might be more advanced pano, but it's hard to know for sure yet.
No, I think you're right, though, that there will be something because the camera is a focal point of the platform. That's something they always talk to. That's something that people really enjoy using. I mean, you can look at like the Flickr stats and everything, and the iPhone 4 and 4S are incredibly popular in terms of camera use. I think that photography on iOS, especially the iPhone, has a special place in the marketing because it is so compelling to so many people. So I would not bet against that.
Yeah, the camera will still. Some people in the chat room are saying that there was this feature in other phones first. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, FaceTime existed well before Apple did FaceTime. Apple does not create new technologies. Apple takes technologies and tries to mainstream them by making them better packaged and easier to use. Arguably, FaceTime and Siri have not been well adapted even by the enthusiast community, but that doesn't mean that Apple won't try again with whatever is next. I'm not quite sure what the FaceTime or Siri feature will be this year, though, Seth, because they already showed off because like with FaceTime, they had the sign language moment. With Siri, they had the reading and responding to text messages accessibility feature. This year, they already showed off kiosk mode, and they already showed off a bunch of Siri enhancements. So I'm not quite sure what that second slot will be, but maybe paying with something, Passbook in Starbucks or something.
Yeah, do you think they're going to push for payments?
If they go NFC, it might be a year too early. That might be next year. But if they go with NFC, I think we said that on the show when Mark Gurman and Matthew Panzarino were on, that they will not mention NFC. They will say you can pay with your iPhone at Apple stores, Target, and Starbucks, and you'll never hear about RFID.
Yes, exactly. You'll never hear the technology behind it. It'll have some cutesy poo name, and that'll be it. But I think I agree that it may be a little early, but that's only because we're looking at the landscape now and seeing that there are not a lot of NFC terminals where people can actually go up, do it. It works. Everyone understands, both on the consumer side and on the merchant side, how it's supposed to work. I do think if they do it and it's part of Passbook, that you're right. It's going to be select retail locations like Apple and Target, and probably exactly the stuff we saw. And it's then that's had the foot in the door. That's how it's going to start. You're never going to hear NFC. You're never going to hear RFID, like you said. It's going to just be a couple places, and then it's going to be a couple more places. It's going to be like the iTunes March, where they had a couple labels and they had a couple more, and now it's like a juggernaut.
And Santa will have forgotten to get one present and inevitably have to rush into Target and buy something to save Christmas using his iPhone. Mm-hmm. So, getting back to this list, I won't go through the whole thing, but I went through all the keynotes for all the versions of iOS. And iOS 6, we got Apple Maps, Siri enhancement, Facebook integration, shared photo streams, Passbook, FaceTime over cellular, phone enhancements, mail enhancements, not that kind of mail enhancement, Seth. Just FYI, MAIL enhancements, Safari enhancements, and accessibility enhancements. And by contrast, what we've seen so far, I'm fairly sure Android 4.1 is cooked. I mean, the different manufacturers will do different things, but the Google experience, we got Project Butter, home screen widget enhancements, enhanced text input, offline voice, enhanced language support, accessibility enhancements, camera enhancements, Android Beam enhancements, actionable notifications, search enhancements / Google Now, the platform developer the platform developer kit, and Google Play announcements. BlackBerry 10 preview, we got the Flow interface, predictive keyboard, and time warp camera. And Windows Phone 8, we got modern hardware support, I kid you not. Internet Explorer 10, I kid you not. Native gaming support, I kid you not. NFC, Windows Phone Wallet, Nokia Maps, business enhancements from Microsoft, which that sounds odd coming from Microsoft because usually people enhance business by using Microsoft, and start screen enhancements. And putting it all side by side, it led me to a bit of a revelation, Seth.
Oh, do tell.
Yeah, like I said, this was all about Apple. If you look at the flagship features, they continue Siri's intermediation and brokerage of search so that Apple becomes the pipe through which search is channeled, and they can sell off different aspects of that to your Yelps and your Yahoos. It cements ownership of iOS location data and maps because it forces Google to become, at best, a third-party map alternative, and all the core data that Google gets now from every iOS user, they no longer get by default. It outsources social services to Twitter and Facebook. Apple, they own iOS, they own iCloud. They do not seem to want to own the social layer. It prepares them for the lucrative future of mobile payments, which is probably going to be a couple $billion, multi-billion-dollar industry. And it increases iOS support for the growing Asian markets. And that really is all about Apple.
I think there's a pattern here with this, at least with this release. And as you said, some of the things you called out, it is all about Apple. But more importantly, I think it's all about filling in the last few little gaps that probably between the current phone and iOS 5, people might say out loud. Like, for instance, with the move to Apple Maps, and all right, so Siri and Apple Maps, obviously they're trying to disintermediate Google and just take it on their own and get the data that way. But I can imagine that a regular person using Apple Maps probably has at least once said, man, I wish I could just put this in the car and it would tell me where to go, like turn by turn. That would be great if I could do that.
Yeah, which Google wouldn't give them because Apple wouldn't take latitude.
Right. So now you're going to have it. People have probably said, Siri's cool when it works, wink, wink, but I wish it could do more. Well, now it's going to do a little bit more, and that's going to continue. People probably said, oh, that's great, it does Twitter, but I'm not on Twitter. I wish it did Facebook. Well, now it does Facebook. People probably said, oh, FaceTime, I would use it, but I can't use it unless... Well, now you can do it over cellular, mostly. It's all these things that probably are just picking up the slack where, it fell down before. And look at what's happening. You've got integration with Facebook and Twitter now, which is where people are, period. So that's just a win. You've got Google getting cut out of the mix. You've got the carriers getting not cut out of the mix, but FaceTime over cellular. I mean, we all figured it would come eventually, but now that it's here, that's like, guess what, guys? This is happening. You're going to have to deal with it. And then all the other little things along the way are just solidifying the platform. People are looking at it and saying, there's not enough here. There's not enough here. They say it in sports all the time, like, this is a rebuilding year. It's not so much a rebuilding year as it's like a solidifying year. They're taking all of the little loose ends, tying them up, making the platform as bulletproof as possible. And then I think next year is going to be just a huge leap.
Well, there is so Apple kind of uses the Intel tick-tock model, and we see that because the 3G and the 3GS are similar, and then the hardware revs with the 4 stays the same for 4S, revs again with the 5. And iOS 5 was a huge update. I mean, I went through the list on that same post, and you have major upgrades to iOS there. So this is not a talk year for iOS. This is a tick year for the software, a talk year for the hardware, because you will get a newly designed iPhone with new stuff in it, and you will most likely also get an iPad mini, which is an entirely new iOS device, which hasn't happened since the iPad in 2010. So this year, it's probably going to be more about the hardware story than the software story. And in the chat room, I think it was a Tanresa again, was saying that's why it should be a 0.1 release. But the number of a release is completely a marketing question now. I mean, there are internal numbers, but Windows 6.5 was released as Windows 7. The number is just used for end users to know they have the next version. So whatever you want to call it, Android 4.1 could easily have been called Android 5 if Google wanted to, and I don't think anyone would have batted an eyebrow.
Right. I mean, they didn't, because they're an engineering company, and engineers understand that this is not a full point release, so they get credit there because they're calling it exactly like it is. Apple, truth be told, should have called this 5 point whatever, but they're not going to do that because it's going to come coincident with new hardware, and they want it to be cool. So
yeah, it would be confusing if the iPhone 5 ran iOS 5.x.
Right. It has to be a big jump, and it's totally for marketing, and you can get upset about it, but you're spinning your wheels, honestly.
Yeah, Apple believes very. I mean, like there's never. The iPod Touch had always had the 0.1 version of the operating system, and they stopped really doing announcements about that. iOS 5 didn't even really have a lot of updates. There was just iOS 5.1, which was a minor update compared to previous years' .1 updates. So I think that's exactly right, Seth. It's just, iOS 6 looks nice and clean, and it's expected. It's the next number after 5 and nothing more than that.
Yeah. And I mean, who knows what kind of foundations they're going to start laying with this version and then the version after it to keep the platform going forward. Because obviously this is the future of Apple's, money. Like, we love our Macs and stuff, but I mean, this thing is out of control. iOS as a platform, the hardware, it's just so,
it's an insane cash machine.
It is. And like, they're not going to look at it and be like, well, guys, we're stalling out. What are we going to do? Like, they're making plans. So even if you don't see it, it's probably going to happen.
Yeah. And I mean, the really interesting thing is that they did not even announce the number of new APIs this year. And I believe almost every previous year they've announced, 1,000 new APIs, 1,500 new APIs, 2,000 new APIs for developers. This year there was the same poster that you usually see behind Scott Forstall, but there was no number thrown out. But there were interesting things up there like auto layout, and a bunch of, not the Siri or notification center, the Siri or widget APIs that developers and users probably wanted, but there was a lot of interesting stuff there. So it's sort of like, it reminds me of when the iPhone 3G came out. That was not a generation. People get confused and say, oh, this is the 6th generation iPhone. Kind of, sort of. The iPhone 3G, the original iPhone was 1,1 for the first model. And the iPhone 3G was 1,2 because the internals didn't change that much. And the 3GS was 2,1. And the current iPhone, the 4S, is actually iPhone 4,1. And the next iPhone will be iPhone 5,1. And that's geeky, but it kind of shows you what Apple considers important. A new radio technology like 3G is not a generational increase for hardware, but a new processor is. And it could be they feel the same way about iOS. The APIs they have private APIs internally that are either under NDA or they're not talking about, and they have the ones that they've shown developers, and they could consider that to be enough to be a heck of a new product, especially combined with the new hardware.
Mm-hmm.
Was that too geek? Did I put my propeller hat on?
I did see something spinning above you. I didn't want to say anything. It's all right.
I guess the last thing to bring up then is this iPad mini, which has gotten more mainstream attention than ever. The rumors have been around for a long time. We heard about the price point, I think back in March, $200. People say it's going to be a 7.85 inch device. We have not heard that. We just heard that it was called the 7-inch iPad, but that's, Apple calls the 15.4 inch MacBook the 15-inch MacBook. So that doesn't surprise me. And if Apple ever called it an 8-inch iPad, it better be over 8 inches or people will complain Apple's ripping them off for, 0.15 inches.
Right. So they don't call the iPad the 10-inch iPad. They call it the iPad. So it's not, they're not going to call attention to the number. It's going to be smaller than the current iPad, and that's really what it's going to be.
The new iPad, the small iPad by Apple. But yeah, so we keep hearing that it's going to come out at around $200. And now Bloomberg and the Wall Street Journal and now the New York Times have all, some people say, been fed the story. Some people say it was coincidentally timed with the Nexus 7 announcement. I don't think that's necessarily the case because I don't think anyone predicting a huge, like an iPad level sales event for the Nexus 7. Google's selling it online and it will be in retailers, but I don't know if Google's manufacturing 100 million of them at this point. But I think Apple is just starting to seed the space the way they did with the original iPad.
Oh yeah, definitely. And I mean, this is what they did with the iPod, right? They came out with one iPod. The rest of the market said, all right, we've got the rest of this space to fill. And then slowly but surely they were like, well, you can have that space, but we're going to take this middle space too with the mini. And then eventually they were like, all right, well, we've got our Flash players over here. And Apple was like, yeah, about that.
Yeah.
I mean, it's going to happen, right? At some point, they're going to diversify that line the way they did with the Mac line because that's where the company wants to go. That's the stuff that's selling. That's the stuff that's, captivating and gigantic. The thing that keeps coming around, though, that people kind of touch on and kind of don't, nobody can agree on, is what happens to the iPod Touch. And I don't.
We've heard it stays. We've heard that Apple's keeping it.
I totally think so. I think it would be crazy to think that the iPod Touch is going to go away or that the iPad mini, for lack of a better term, is going to eat into it. And even if you make the price point argument like, well, if the iPad mini is $199, what are you going to do? You can't sell an iPod Touch for that much. Yeah, you can, first of all, because some people might want an iPod Touch and not an iPad for a lot of reasons. And who's to say that they're not going to drop the price? I mean,
Yeah.
they have so much money, it's stupid. It's actually dumb to think about how much money they have. So,
And that iPod Touch was not revved. The hardware was not revved last year. The economies of scale on that device are pretty darn good.
exactly. And the people who are buying it, it is probably enough device for them. I mean, I'm guessing that the market for the iPod Touch, at least in my understanding in the past, was a whole lot of kids and then people who had other phones.
Yeah, and did not want an iPhone, but wanted an entryway to the App Store.
And they didn't care about the latest and greatest performance. They had that. That was enough. It played the games. They were good. If they keep that same version and just say, yeah, it's still part of the line, maybe we bump up the chip, and you know what? Now it's $99. That's enormous. I mean, I can see that happening because they would do that knowing, well, we're not making as much on each one, but we're still not losing money because this is now, what is it, the third year they're having it?
Well, I mean, the iPod sales as a whole are dwindling, and the iPod Touch accounts for half of those sales and is probably dwindling along with it as the iPhone price comes down. And Apple, but Apple's kept the iPod Classic around for a long time, and they'll keep the iPod Touch around, I figure, until nature chooses it for extinction.
Oh, honestly, if they're still selling the iPod Classic today, you can go in and get one today. What makes you think the Touch is going anywhere?
Yeah, it might linger on for a couple years until it sells so few that Apple, X-serves it.
Yeah.
But we did a bunch of articles on the iPad Mini this week. We took a look at what the name could be, what kind of conventions Apple could use, just because people kept saying Apple's going to call it this or that. And we also looked at the panel because we originally heard, Seth, that it was going to be identical to the current iPad, just smaller. And we spoke about the interface previously. And, the TouchPad Go was basically WebOS at 7 inches. So people have shown that you can shrink an OS down. And Derek Kessler from WebOS Nation said it was perfectly usable. But that leaves the question of the screen resolution, because the current iPad is a eye-boggling 2048 by 1536. And if they're shrinking that down, that's an expensive panel. So we thought there was basically three options that Apple could do. They could go with the iPhone 3GS panel, which is non-Retina, 163 DPI. And Apple makes a ton of those panels. They've made them since 2007, so they're really cheap to make, and it would help keep prices down. They could go with the iPod Touch panel, which is Retina, but is not IPS, does not have in-plane switching. And they can already make that panel for an iPod Touch at $200. So maybe they could make it at a slightly larger size for the new iPad Mini. But the iPad is more of a social thing, and you wouldn't have very good angles of view, so who knows? Or they could go with the iPhone panel, which is a Retina display and an IPS panel, but that seems really pricey at a $200 point.
Well, I would make the same argument that I did for the Touch. I don't think they're going to bring an entry into the iPad line that is going to disappoint people that could have bought the larger one, that the quality is not going to be as good. I think that they're going to have an outstanding display on it because that's the direction they're going in. They're not going to say, well, it's kind of like our old stuff, but it's a smaller iPad, so you'll buy it. But this is like their flagship fun thing. Obviously we know the iPhone sells far more, but the iPad is the big captivating device that everybody has to have. I'm betting that the panel is going to be better than people think it is. I don't know specifically which type of panel they're going to use, but I'd be shocked if it wasn't like as dense as the iPhone at least. And there's no way they're going to not have a good display on it.
So there's two schools of thought. One is that Apple does not, aside from the iPhone 3GS, there is no current generation iOS hardware that is not Retina. The iPhone, the iPod Touch, and as of March, the iPad are all Retina. The other school of thought is that Apple has never launched an iOS device with a Retina display. The iPhone, the iPod Touch, and the iPad were all upgraded to Retina. And the ability to offer Retina as an upgrade is a compelling way to sell additional generations of iPad Mini in the future.
All right, I could see that, but I don't agree with it. I don't think they're going to bring an iPad out that isn't breathtakingly good at any size.
Well, 163 is still higher quality than the iPad. I mean, it's slightly higher density than the current iPad 2 display. So it wouldn't be as bad as a previous non-Retina iPad, but it would be the same as the non-Retina iPhone. Say that 10 times fast.
I don't know. My gut just tells me don't ask me how to do the math. Don't ask me,
The bill of goods, Seth. What's the bill of goods?
I'm not going to be able to provide that for you. I just feel extremely strongly that the panel will not disappoint. Whatever the math ends up shaking out to, it's going to look nice because you know what? The Nexus 7 looks nice, and whatever's coming out from other companies looks nice now. It's it's not quote
But
unquote.
the Nexus
whatever.
7 is what 1200 by 800, I think. So it's hot, and it's only 7 inches. That's a pretty good density. It's not iPad 3 density, but it's a pretty good density.
Right. It looks nice. I mean, the Kindle Fire is like 1024 by 600 or something, and it's not unusable. It's not great, but it's not unusable. So anything above that is gonna be great. And I can't see them. The argument that they'd introduce, it's not a new product. It's not a new product. It's a variant on an existing product.
The Kindle Fire is basically a BlackBerry playbook that's been re-softwared.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't see the iPad mini as a new product. I see it as another entry into an existing product family. And I don't think with something as high profile as the iPad that they're going to do anything that would call attention to the fact that it's, quote, not as good.
Steve Poirier in the chat room is saying 216 is the density on the Nexus 7. Sorry, go ahead.
That's nice.
I'll put the link in the chat room where we go over all the maths, as the Europeans would say. I think Mark Edwards would say the maths as well.
Oh, is he he's a plural mather?
I think so. Well, we're plural pantsers, aren't we?
What does he say? Pant?
I'm not going to put words into his Australian mouth, but it's quite possible. So
that was a nice pant.
We have a bunch of stuff in there for people to look at, but it's going to be interesting. Apple does not want to cede the $200 market to the likes of Amazon and Google. And an iPad at $200, I mean, we've spoken about what that would mean for education, especially considering Apple's textbook play earlier in the year. I know Liana Lofty and Ashley Esqueda have been twittering that at me relentlessly. At that price, everyone in UPS could get rid of those horrible, whatever embedded operating system pads they have now and be given an iPad mini. It is a hell of a mass market play.
Yeah, it is. Those poor people come to the building every day and they make me sign on the thing, and it weighs like 16 pounds.
It's heavier than the package.
I weep for them.
Yeah, and at $200, especially on volume discount, those things. I mean, it's a good. We did another article. I'm going to stop putting stuff in the chat room now. I'm getting tired of pasting links, but on why Apple would sell this, and it's the same reason they made an iPod Mini and an iPad and an iPod Nano. It's to not leave space in the market for competitors.
Yeah, I feel like it's inevitable. Oh God, it's inevitable for this to happen. This is the natural progression of how Apple squeezes the air out of a market.
That was very Agent Smith of you.
I wish I could have delivered it as eloquently as he did. It was
more like a virus.
Trip over my own feet as I try to get it out.
Seth, did we solve all the problems in the Apple world tonight?
I think we came close.
Yeah, that was a dandy of a show.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so sir, if this is not too abrupt a change of pace, where can we find out more about you?
You can find me on Twitter, Seth Clifford. You can find me here and on Iterate with Rene and Mark. And if you want to see some of the work we do, nickelfish.com.
And you can find me at Rene Ritchie. You can find all of us at iMore. You can contact us at podcast@imore.com or just leave a comment on the show when it goes live. You can find all of our shows at mobilenations.com/shows. And in general, just, shout at us out the window if you want to. We're very accessible.
Mm-hmm. Indeed.